The 2014 Florida legislative session is complete. Tonight, we'll break down this year's session with local members of the Northwest Florida delegation from the WSRE viewing area. We are live, interactive, and on television, radio, and of course, we're ready for your questions this evening. Legislative review, dialogue with the delegation is straight ahead.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
And a very pleasant good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for joining us. The 2014 Florida legislative session is complete, and Governor Rick Scott has signed the state's $77 billion budget. It's the largest, by the way, in the Sunshine State's history. This year's session brought about positive news for public schools, with over $20 billion headed their way. Florida residents will also get a break on vehicle registrations as the 2009 increases are rolled back. And medical marijuana, one of the most controversial issues of this year's session, found support. Both the House and the Senate passed a bill allowing the use of the substance called Charlotte's Web. However, as of this broadcast, Governor Scott has not signed the bill into law. Issues not gaining much traction this year include Medicaid expansion, gambling, and pension reform. Tonight, we'll analyze the 2014 legislative session with members of the Northwest Florida legislative delegation. Your participation is strongly encouraged. You can call in your questions off the air at 850-484-1223 or toll free at 1-800-239-WSRE. You can also email your questions to questions@WSRE. And by the way, you can also participate and submit questions through the WSRE Facebook page. I want to mention that in addition to the television broadcast this evening, our program is also being simulcast on News Radio 1620. Let me introduce our panel this evening. We'll begin with Senate President Don Gates. Senator Gates represents District 1, which includes Bay, Holmes, Jackson, Washington, and parts of Okaloosa County. Senator Gates' colleague in the Senate is Senator Greg Evers. He was unable to join us this evening. Senator Evers represents District 2, which covers parts of Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties. From the Florida House of Representatives, Clay Ingram from District 1, which includes parts of Escambia County. From District 4, Representative Matt Gates. District 4 covers part of Okaloosa County. From District 2, Representative Mike Hill. District 2 covers parts of Escambia and Santa Rosa counties. District 3's representative is Doug Broxson. District 3 covers parts of Okaloosa and Santa Rosa counties. Well, gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us again, and welcome. Let me begin with you, Senate President Don Gates. What are you most proud of for the 2014 session?
I'm proudest of the fact that we put together a budget that put people first, that put the needs of vulnerable Floridians first. We passed a massive reform of our child welfare system. It was needed. We passed the Florida GI Bill to provide more educational benefits and job help to veterans better than anybody else in the country. And I'm also pleased that the legislature and the governor worked together to make sure that as the economy was improving a little bit more, that the very first thing we did was to cut taxes, to reduce the amount of money that people have to pay into our state government. Representative Hill, who's here with us tonight, was the House sponsor of the legislation that cut vehicle registration fees, and that affects everybody who drives a car or truck to school or work anywhere in the state. And then we set aside $3 billion for rainy days, because we know that bad times could come. They have come in the past. We want to make sure that Florida can once again, if we have to, withstand any kind of financial recession. So good financial stewardship, taking care of the state's critical resources and critical needs, and a balanced budget, which a lot of states, and certainly the federal government, wish they had.
Well, you mentioned Representative Hill, so let me jump over to him. He's the newest member of the delegation. How was the first time around?
It was great. What I really enjoyed about this past session is being able to work with a delegation that was conservative, principled, and displayed leadership. And what I mean by that is just recently, Florida overtook New York as the most populous state in the nation. And our budget of $77.1 billion is almost half of New York, who we just overtook. They're at $144 billion. So what we showed with our Florida legislature, leadership by Senate President Gates, Speaker Will Weatherford, and Governor Scott, and with this delegation we have here, we show that using those conservative principles, we can take care of our most vulnerable and do it much less cheaply or inexpensively than a state like New York.
All right. Very good. We're going to cover many topics tonight. We have many viewer questions that have been submitted. Certainly, we encourage you to call in or email us with all of your questions this evening. One of the hot topics, probably the hottest topic of the session, and certainly leading up to the session, was the medical marijuana issue. So I'm going to pose that question to Matt Gates. Tell us about what passed.
Well, Jeff, we have about 125,000 children in Florida who have intractable epilepsy. And that means it's incurable, and that means that every day of these children's lives, they have a seizure that is worse than the day before. And you don't meet too many adults with intractable epilepsy because eventually one of these seizures leads to death. Now, I don't want Florida to be like Colorado or California, but we've seen things in Colorado that have been very promising, where children who are able to use a form of medical cannabis that is non-euphoric, that can't get anybody high, that's non-smokable, see a 50 to 100% reduction in seizures in 85% of cases. So I was initially a skeptic of medical marijuana, but when I met with people from our community that were desperate parents of developmentally disabled, vulnerable children, I decided to step up and sponsor the Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act this last year. We've put it before the governor. I'm confident he will sign it into law, and we will provide life-saving relief to hundreds of thousands of Florida families.
And if for some reason the governor did not sign it, but he does not veto it, then it can still become a law, correct?
That's right. And what I was so encouraged by is that though the governor was a skeptic, like I was a skeptic when I was first presented with the issue, on the day when we debated the Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act on the floor of the House, Governor Scott said he would sign the bill. So it will be sent to him shortly. I expect he will sign it, and we will have an opportunity to allow families to have a greater say regarding the health care of their children.
Any idea of the time frame before people could start using this?
Yeah, the law requires dispensing organizations to receive licenses by January 1. So very soon we'll have 5 licenses throughout the state. One will be in Northwest Florida, and very soon after that, I guess as fast as it takes a plant to grow, there will be product available for people in need.
Okay. Would any of you other representatives or Senate President Gates like to add to that?
Just to say that I as well was a skeptic. I probably have answered 100 emails from people in Northwest Florida who've said, well, why don't you legalize marijuana? I'm opposed to a retail legalization of marijuana. I'll vote against the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot. But what Matt proposed and what the Senate and the House passed is a very limited approach to help people who can't get help through the customary conventional tools of medical science. And if I were one of those parents, I don't think that I would be as patient as those in our community have been. I think I'd be banging on the door of anybody who could help. And I'm proud that my son, that Representative Matt Gates, was the one who stepped up and helped. And I'm confident, as he is, that Governor Scott will sign the bill within the next 2 weeks.
Anyone else want to add to it?
Well, Jeff, I want to say that the only evidence that God cursed any plant was the fig tree. There's nothing inherently wrong with plants. The problem we've had is we've had abuse. And if people out there think that the legislature sent a message that we're going to put the guard down on abuse, they're wrong. If you're going to get drunk on marijuana, you're going to have a problem with us and with the state of Florida. So I think this was a compassionate effort for us to reach out to the most vulnerable in our society, people that cannot help themselves, and say, we're not sure, but we're going to try it. And we'll have real evidence that will demonstrate whether this works or not.
What is the difference between this and the constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in the upcoming election? Anyone want to address that quick like? Or?
Well, the constitutional amendment is functionally the legalization of marijuana. If that passes, you'll have circumstances where people will be able to pay $40, walk into a weed doctor, get a prescription, walk out, and we will see dispensaries, marijuana dispensaries, in just about every strip mall in Florida. That's not the model that I think is most effective to get true medicine to people truly in need. You know, in states like California, where they've had laws like our Amendment 2, 97% of the people that end up receiving a prescription and using marijuana don't have one of the itemized ailments in the law. They don't have cancer, they don't have ALS, they don't have MS. They're people who simply, claim they have a sleep disorder or back pain, and then they end up using marijuana recreationally. That's what Amendment 2 will do. That's why every member of our delegation is opposed to Amendment 2. But we didn't think that it was enough just to say we're against a proposal. We worked together as a team to make sure that we could narrowly tailor a solution to the real problem, not a manufactured problem, to legalize recreational marijuana.
Okay. Getting a lot of response from viewers this evening, so I'm going to get right to viewer questions here. And let me begin with the question that when will the legislature tackle the subject of gaming within all of Florida and respond to those counties, and he puts Lee, et cetera, in parentheses, which have already passed referendums for slot machines at racing facilities. Now, I know there was a lot of talk about casino gambling leading up to the session, sort of lost traction, so what's the story?
Well, let me just say, as President of the Senate, that we appointed a committee that dealt specifically with gaming. The House did the same thing. The Senate committee went around the state. Pensacola is one of the places we came. We took public testimony, and we were prepared to move forward with a bill, not necessarily a bill that would make everybody happy, but a bill that would bring some order out of chaos. The gaming industry in Florida is either underregulated, overregulated, or unregulated, depending upon your point of view, but it's certainly inequitably regulated. However, in order for a gaming policy to really come forward and be enacted, you've got to do it in the context of the Seminole Compact, which is the compact between the state of Florida and the Seminole tribe, which allows them as a sovereign nation to have certain gaming activities on their reservations. Well, the governor, by law, is the one who negotiates changes to the Seminole Compact. Those changes are up for negotiation in 2015. The governor has chosen to do it in 2015. And so we're not going to be able to really address gaming, and I happen to be somebody who votes generally against the expansion of gaming, but we're not going to be able to address gaming outside of what the governor does in negotiating a compact. When the governor comes forward with a compact negotiation, which I think will be early next year, then I think it'll be possible for us to take up all of the information that we gathered around the state, the studies that we did, the evidence that we have, and present a gaming policy to people here in Florida and see what they think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jeff, and without that comprehensive look or approach to gaming, I think we're at risk. And I think we've already seen this with the proliferation of the internet cafes that used to be all around the state, of death by 1,000 cuts due to nefarious actors pushing the limit with regard to the law. And I think that's why the House, for instance, we voted to create some sort of gaming structure with a commissioner. Even those of us who are, like the Senate President said, would see ourselves as opposed to the expansion of gaming or casino-style gaming, we still think there needs to be a structure in place to prevent the proliferation of gaming through death by 1,000 cuts through things like bingo halls or internet cafes that have been a problem in the past.
Okay.
And Jeff, what I would add to that is I get a lot of feedback from my constituents in this area, and they are adamantly opposed to the expansion of any gambling, casino-style gambling facilities in our area. And I agree with that. There's an organization called No Casinos, which has done a study which has shown that whenever a gambling, casino-style type facility comes into an area, that it becomes a predator type business. And what I mean by that are the restaurants and hotels that are around it can't compete with the rates that they charge, and so eventually they go out of business. And then we find that the response time of our police force has greatly been exaggerated because they're spending so much time at these casinos instead. We've seen it in places like Biloxi and other places. So what that would mean then is potentially higher taxes to the citizens, because we would have to have more police officers in order to take care of the crime problem. So for those reasons and many others, I'm glad that our entire delegation is against the expansion of casino-style gambling in our area.
All right. Anybody else want to jump in on that, or we pretty well covered it, I think, probably. Okay, let me ask another question from a viewer. Viewer says Americans have driven less per capita for 7 consecutive years, and this appears to reflect a permanent shift as younger people and retiring baby boomers want to live in walkable urban communities rather than spend their days stuck behind the wheel of a car. Yet almost all state transportation projects in our area simply add lanes to existing roads, encouraging people to drive more. So the question becomes, when will we start seeing the legislature acknowledge changing needs and seize this economic opportunity by investing in making our communities safer and more pleasant for walking and bicycling?
Well, one of the things that we did to ensure that people are able to live in the types of urban centers that the viewer referenced was deregulating and devolving a lot of the authority that used to be vested in Tallahassee to determine what communities would be approved and not approved. That authority now lies with counties. And so if the viewer or others believe that there ought to be more of those types of urban centers where people can live closer to where they work, the good news is you can go to your county commission and you don't have to go seek approval from Tallahassee. If the viewer is concerned about the lack of access to things like light rail, the answer is simply that we can't achieve that scale in the Panhandle yet. We may be able to do that someday, but I'm not one that wants to throw a lot of government money forever at functionally a business venture that is going to lose money and not be successful. Unfortunately, the legislature in prior years approved a Sunrail train system in Central Florida that sent our dollars to Central Florida to build light rail, and that light rail is a lost leader. It is losing money at a pretty aggressive rate. So I don't want us to make bad business decisions, and I think that the strategy we've had to invest in things like a more acceptable bridge in Pensacola, across Pensacola Bay, that won't be tolled. I think that's a good investment. I think ensuring that we've got appropriate sectors to take people from the south ends of our counties up to I-10 are good investments, and I think that that's what the reaction is that we've received from our business partners as well.
Let me just throw this in off the record. Speaking of roads and transportation, what do you make of what happened in the recent flood with the destruction of so many roads and highways in the area? Any thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, when new roads are developed, when bridges are put in, when culvert systems or wastewater systems are engineered, we have to simply bear in mind the likelihood that living in the kind of community that we do, close to the water, with the kind of topography that we have, that we could be in danger of having roads wash out. We had that happen in Okaloosa County when Highway 98 washed out connecting Destin and Fort Walton Beach. And the road bed had to be re-engineered so that if, God forbid, we had another hurricane that swept across Okaloosa Island, that we wouldn't lose Highway 98 as we did a couple of times. And so therefore I think our engineers are taking lessons from the destruction that we've had from the flash floods. And my guess is that you'll see that roads, bridges, and culvert and wastewater systems will be engineered now with an eye toward making sure that if the worst happens, we can be better prepared for it.
Go
I
ahead.
think, Jeff, that what any disaster always exposes is your weakness. However, the cost of building up those weaknesses and making them strengths is something the public may or may not want to do. To make our area subject to a 100-year rain or a 100-year flood or a hurricane would cost billions of dollars. And that would have to be a referendum item to ask the citizens of all these counties that were impacted, do you want to see your taxes increase to deal with the potential of another flood in 50 years? My guess is, based on my emails, that the answer probably is no. But we're going to do the best we can. We've learned some valuable lessons. FDOT's been in here. The governor's been in here several times. We're looking at all these areas to make sure that it does not happen again in the same way it happened before.
All right, very good. Let me stay on roads, and Senator Gates, probably you want to take this question. This is from a viewer. Question regarding the Brooks Bridge replacement, Highway 98, Fort Walton Beach. Two questions, the viewer says, or ask, I should say. Could any parts of the current Hurlburt Air Force Base Highway 98 bypass project, the on-off ramps, et cetera, be integrated with the planning for Brooks Bridge on-off ramps? And could pedestals for an elevated Highway 98 access to a new bridge be placed along the existing Highway 98 right-of-way?
Well, here's the good news. Politicians don't get to make engineering decisions. If we did, we'd have all kinds of hooks hanging from the sky. Instead, engineers will make those decisions based on public input, based on public hearings, based on gathering information from people who not only have opinions but have information. Any kind of incursion of a state highway or even a local road onto federal property like at Hurlburt, as the questioner asks, brings a whole new dimension to the debate. And that is getting the Department of the Air Force and the Department of Defense to agree to allow some kind of incursion of one of our highways onto their land. I think that sets off the whole issue of the Brooks Bridge for a number of years, if that were the only alternative. But working with our delegation, we were able to get legislation passed this year, items put in the budget, so that not only will there be a study of replacing the Brooks Bridge where it is, but also an open-minded look at other alternatives that might exist, because the Brooks Bridge, according to the Department of Transportation, is going to have to be replaced or put in a different location sometime within the next few years. It's over 50 years old. Bridges wear out just like people wear out. But the good news is that the approach we've taken in the legislature is to say to the Department of Transportation, look at all the options, listen to the public, take the engineering options and consider them very carefully. But when you get involved with federal property, you probably put off a solution for years to come.
Jeff, the Senate President's exactly right. But I would say this, where possible, I think the 9 Mile Road expansion and widening is a good example. We fully funded, I think something the legislature got right was fully funding the 5-year transportation work plan here in this area. And so, again, 9 Mile Road's a good example. Where you're going to do some construction on one part of the road, if you can do the widening of the next section at the same time, it logically is going to save money. Obviously, it's just the county and the state here involved in that, and we don't have to deal with the military and other bureaucracies of different kinds at all levels of government. Makes it a little bit easier, but obviously, if we can do projects together all at once, it makes them less expensive, and then easier on commuters as well. So it's something that I think is looked at when possible.
All right. Here's another viewer question. Viewer says, I read something about the Florida legislature that they are considering giving insurance companies unlimited time frames for settling litigated disputes. And the viewer wants to know, is this true, and why would you consider, if in fact it is true, why would you consider this kind of legislation? She goes on to say she's been trying to settle up with an insurance company since about 2006. So who wants to take that one?
I'll take that one, Jeff. Being a State Farm agent by profession, I would be shocked to have anyone trying to have their claim settled since 2006. And the legislature did not pass any legislation that gave insurance companies unlimited time to settle a claim. In fact, it was the opposite, where they are given a certain amount of time to settle a claim. And working with Chief Atwater, each time there's a claim now, they're going to be handed what is called a claim bill of rights, which will explain out to the customer exactly what your rights are to having that claim settled. So instead of saying that it's unlimited, we've actually put limits on when a claim can be settled and the rights that the customer has.
And I'll note that the legislature actually in recent years passed legislation that requires insurance companies to either approve or deny a claim within 90 days. The problem is there's no real teeth to that law, because the courts have ruled subsequently that if an insurance company fails to either approve or deny a claim within 90 days, you can call the Office of Insurance Regulation, but you have no legal remedy. So I'm one of the legislators who actually wants to go in and say, if an insurance company doesn't do that, then there ought to be some presumptions drawn against that insurance company and on behalf of the consumer. And hopefully those will be some of the reforms that will be evaluated in coming legislative sessions.
Very good. Here's another insurance question, and in both of those there were naming names of the insurance companies, and just to be fair, I'm not going to mention the insurance companies. But anyway, the question from the viewer is, I would like to know why my insurance company is charging my family an extra $480.41 this year called surcharges to help repay this particular insurance company, the Citizens Insurance Company, the particular insurance company, brand name, and then comma, the Citizens Insurance Company, the Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Fund, and the Florida Catastrophe Emergency Assessment Fund. And she basically says, we bought our home in Destin. We did not select a home on the Gulf or on Choctawhatchee Bay because we didn't want to pay the extra insurance costs, taxes, so on, to keep it up. We're being good stewards of our retirement savings and so on and so forth. Basically, she's saying, then if you don't have the money to pay the insurance, then you shouldn't be living on the water. So
It's one of the greatest inequities, Jeff, I think that we see, especially here in the Panhandle, that a grandmother in Cantonment is paying for someone in Miami to have a beachfront home and subsidize their insurance or provide their insurance. And so it's something that we fight against. I think we've tried to do things like allowing surplus lines carriers into the state, anything to shrink the citizens' book of business. I think we here are all in favor of doing that, work toward it every session. And again, it's one of the greatest inequities that I think I see financially on a day-to-day basis with constituents.
And the answer can be politically unpopular. Here's the answer. People who are citizens policyholders should have to pay a higher premium than they're paying today. The problem is the government is the one regulating the premium for citizens insurance. And when that's the case, and when the state has liability in our CAT fund that is not actuarially sound, you've got people like the folks Representative Ingram mentioned, the grandmother in Cantonment that is subsidizing the risk of someone else. Now, not in this past session, but in the year before, there was legislation that would have increased the amount of premiums at a faster rate for people on Citizens so they could pay for their own risk. Representative Ingram, Representative Broxson, and I voted for that bill on the floor of the House, but it failed by, I think, it was either 4 or 5 votes. So we'll keep fighting to create more equity. Representative Hill wasn't there. He probably would have joined us in that vote. But we'll be fighting to create more equity. The problem is that too many legislators are beholden to their constituents who live on the coast, and they're not willing to say the courageous thing, which is those that we really shouldn't have some people subsidizing the risk that other people choose to undertake.
How healthy is Citizens right now? Citizens Insurance Company. If we were to get another, let's take an Ivan type storm or something along those lines.
I think you could put it this way, that it's as healthy as everyone that has a policy in the state is going to have to pay up. It's sort of like a government's healthy because it has the ability to tax its citizens regardless of what kind of frivolous spending they might engage in. And so if you look at it that way, they would do okay. But I mean, that's not right, and it's not just, and certainly not fair to policyholders that they would be assessed.
Well, the reality, Jeff, is that we probably can handle one major storm with our CAT fund and Citizens, and then we would have to find alternative resources of surplus. The companies that are doing business in Florida are not as strong as they were prior to Ivan. And the marketplace simply changed, and the legislature made an effort by creating Citizens to have a place of last resort where people could buy insurance. Unfortunately, Citizens has become a very strong competitor in the marketplace, and that's driven prices down in certain areas, and in certain areas where there should be increases, like in South Florida, where their loss ratios are significantly higher than they are in the Panhandle, we're subsidizing that, and we need to be using that surplus preparing for a future storm.
All right, very good. I had another question, and pretty much in the same concept there of why our insurance rates are continuing to rise and why they continue to remain rather high. Let me move on to another question here, again from a viewer. A lot of great viewer questions tonight. We certainly appreciate that, and thank you for watching WSRE television. And of course, the broadcast is also going out over News Radio 1620, so if you're listening on the radio, thank you as well. Viewer question says, Representatives, please address and state your reaction to the United States Air Force's request and the so-called need to invade our, that's the viewer's stance on that, invade our state parks and state forest lands for maneuvers using firepower, all-terrain vehicles, paint guns, low-level aircraft, troops on the ground, day and night, war games going on. Well, you get the idea.
Gosh, it sounds like a war in the Balkans. Well, let me first of all say that we're very fortunate in the state of Florida, and particularly in Northwest Florida, to have the United States Air Force, to have the Army, to have the Marines, to have the Navy here in our area. And anything that we can do that will not only keep them here, but also protect those bases and those missions from being diminished in any way, and perhaps even moved west by Democrats and Republicans in Congress who'd love to have these bases and missions. Anything we can do, we ought to do. And so, therefore, in answer to the viewer's question, I'm for allowing our military forces, particularly the Air Force, to use land that's operated and owned by the state so long as there is no danger to human beings, and so long as all of the proper precautions are taken to make sure that we're not leaving unexploded ordnance or anything else in an area that might be harmful. There's been, throughout our history, there's been uses made of federal and state lands for military maneuvers, and I don't think there's compelling evidence that the result has been the despoiling of those lands. So the answer is, I'm for the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army having access to those sites, and I'll vote for it every single time.
And we can't forget, we're at war. I mean, we're a country at war where there's some very dangerous people that want to do us harm. And the last thing we should be worried about is whether or not we can be worse neighbors to the United States Air Force and to the other military missions that are based in Florida. And anyone who believes that the military can go in and do things that harm our environment in the state is misinformed. The military carries with them the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act. The people out there that are, maybe 7 men or women that are engaging in a war game with some paintball guns, I mean, they can't even move a gopher tortoise if they want to because of the federal regulations. They're even stronger than many of the state regulations. So I think there was a bit of hyperbole in that question. But we live in dangerous times, and I'm glad that Florida is willing to be at the tip of the sword to support our military.
Yeah. Jeff, I would agree and echo with everything that Senate President Gates and Representative Gates said. Being in the Air Force previously and serving on the Commander's Action Team, I saw firsthand that whenever the military wants to do any sort of maneuver, they must get approval first. It is very extensive. It comes from the EPA, the DEP, and so that approval is not given unless it can be shown in a clear manner that it will not hurt the environment at all and certain species of animals, as Representative Gates said. So these maneuvers that are going on, I agree, are a good thing for us to have, and it was done in a very well manner.
Jeff, one last point. Most of the lands that we have in Florida that are state lands at one time were federal lands. The federal government just did not give us that without any provisions. They, in essence, created leases that has a clawback provision that says if they need to use that land for any purpose in the future, they have the right to do that. Fortunately, the military has been very polite in doing public forums, going through our districts and all the other districts in Florida, getting public opinion on exactly what they're doing and being totally transparent. And I believe that when you look at what they've done, what they're trying to do, and the overwhelming reality that we have to protect the citizens of this country, then it's a well worth trade-off for us.
Okay.
Jeff, I hate to beat this to death, but I had one other thing I wanted to add. Representative Broxson and I both served for a period of time. I think he still serves on the committee, the Natural Resources Appropriations Committee. Something that we heard repeatedly from Commissioner Putnam was that the state owns a whole lot of land that it has to manage. And it becomes financially difficult to manage that land. And if they don't manage it properly, it leads to wildfires and some very bad things that can happen. So originally, and I don't know if this is still on the table, part of the deal of the military using these lands was that they would manage them to an extent, which would relieve the state of some financial burden and even local government some financial burden. So that's another thing to consider. They're bound by all these EPA standards, DEP standards, and then might leave the place better than they found it. That would be a good thing.
Okay. Let's move on. A viewer question again. Lots of good viewer questions this evening. Again, we appreciate those. Alimony reform. And the viewer says, in 2013, both the House and the Senate passed alimony reform bills by a supermajority. He says the governor vetoed the bill after waiting to the last minute before they became law. And he says there was no time to resubmit the bills to meet the governor's reasons for the veto. He says this is an election year, and the sponsors of the bills, Senator Stargell and Representative Workman, were recommended to not put these bills forward again this year, but wait until 2015. And the question is, what do you think the odds are that these bills will pass next year? He says, the viewer, reform is needed in child custody cases, custodian-parent time sharing, and alimony reform, particularly the repeal of permanent alimony. And so the question is, do you think it'll come up in 2015? What's the climate going to be like? And the questioner goes on to say that he is a member of the Florida Family Law Reform, so all out in the open. So jump ball, guys, what do you think?
Well, it sounds like the viewer is someone who recognized that it was the first of the month and they needed to get their alimony check in the mail. And while doing it, send in their email. I can tell you that I'm a supporter of alimony reform for more fairness for everyone and more predictability. In any type of litigation, and I'm a commercial litigator by trade, the thing that helps the litigants the most is to know what the outcome is going to be with the most amount of certainty, where you don't have one judge consider factors that another judge wouldn't consider. So it's that predictability that we seek and are striving for. One of the problems that Governor Scott had with the bill that many of us voted for is that it provided retroactivity, so that if someone had what they perceived to be an unfair resolution of their divorce, that they would be able to go back and relitigate those cases under the new law. And I think there was concern that that would create a lot of court clog and would also just kind of create more of that judicial activity that could be a waste. So I think future efforts will be forward-looking for people who have not been divorced yet, I guess. And I think that has a strong chance of passing, given the number of legislators that supported it in prior years. And I'm the only one that's unmarried, so I don't think anybody else wants to answer that question.
No one else wants to touch it, huh?
The rest of us are happily married.
Well, I understand. I completely understand. So you think there will be some appetite next year, the bottom line is?
I do. I think there's constant appetite. It's just on these very serious questions that deal with family law, you've got to thread the needle in just the right way, because we don't want to have inequitable outcomes.
Okay. Very good. Well, let's move on to something that I'm sure you guys may have heard a little something about along the way. Another one of the more controversial issues, and that is in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. And we've got a couple of questions on that, so let me just kind of throw that up as a wide open question and fire away. Who wants to take it?
Well, I opposed it. I voted against in-state tuition, subsidized tuition for illegals on the Senate floor. I announced to my constituents well in advance that I was opposed to the bill. And the reason why is because we had just passed a bill, Jeff, to provide subsidized in-state tuition to our military, to people who'd gone abroad in many cases, who'd stood on the battlements of freedom, who'd been wounded in many cases. And we said, we want Florida to be the welcome home state for those military members and their families. And so the big advantage was going to be that we'll provide them with educational benefits. We turned around then in the Florida legislature and provided the same benefits to people who are not here legally. Now, people of goodwill disagreed about that. My good friend, the Speaker of the House, Speaker Weatherford, took one position. I took the other position. It turned out that a majority of the legislature supported the Speaker, and therefore it passed. Governor Scott supported subsidized tuition for illegals, and they had good reasons to do so, because there were compelling stories about people who wanted to pursue their education and were brought here maybe when they were 2 or 3 years old, really had no choice in being brought here illegally, and now here they are. They're going to have the sins of the fathers visited on the sons forever. But it seemed to me that it sent the wrong message about what we value, and it provides an entitlement, one more entitlement that I'm not so sure we can afford. One of the estimates, and this was a low estimate, was that this would probably cost about $49 million a year to our institutions, and they'll turn around then and ask for that money from the taxpayers or tuition payers in the state. And that's assuming that not one single more illegal would sign up for a Florida university than who's signed up so far. So I think the cost will be considerable, but I was in the minority. I've been in the minority before. We got outvoted, the governor signed the bill, and now it's the law.
Jeff, I think the Senate president, again, hit the nail on the head. It sends a terrible message. And I think Texas, who has a similar policy, if you've seen the news in the past week or two, they're starting to have a humanitarian crisis on the border because of policies like this that encourage parents to send their kids across the border for programs like this to be able to take advantage of them. And so they're lacking food, water, basic humanitarian needs that the federal government and state government in Texas is having to provide. And we could face something similar here. Obviously, we're in a different scenario as far as geography is concerned, but we send that message and it will have negative consequences. You can count on it.
Jeff, I think our entire delegation voted against that, and I'm proud of them for doing that. The reason why I voted against it was simply because an illegal immigrant will have to pay out-of-state tuition doesn't mean that they can't have an education. They can still obtain an education. It may be at the community college level or state college level. It could also be at the university level, as long as they are willing to pay the tuition, just like an American would have to who came here from another state, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana. And I would say we should put Americans first before we do that for the illegal immigrants. But again, we were in a minority, outvoted on that.
Thank you.
I think it demonstrates a dysfunctional federal government. If they would simply enforce the law, then we would not have to deal with some of these situations that are becoming generational. You can't look back 30 years and say that a government that did not enforce the law does not create problems downstream. And now we're dealing with some of those downstream problems that appear on the surface to be unfair, but certainly send the wrong message to people that want to come to this country that now believe that Florida has dropped their guard and welcome aboard illegally.
And the broader political dynamic is this, very candidly, Jeff. Democrats have been very successful in the last 2 election cycles of using entitlement programs to buy votes. And instead of remaining principled like our delegation did, too many Republicans, as a matter of fact, a majority of Republicans in the state House and state Senate decided to become more like the Democrats and create a new entitlement to buy votes. So we won't support that. We're going to remain true to our principles, to believe in limited government, economic freedom, and to not go and approve an entitlement that we have no idea how much it's going to cost and no real understanding of the impact it'll have on our rule of law.
Okay. Here's a viewer question. What type of growth should we encourage in the Panhandle? Good question. What kind of growth?
Jeff, we for so long, it's a fantastic question. For so long, we have gone after tech jobs, and that's fantastic, and I'm glad we have. We should continue to do it. But I think we've almost thumbed our nose at industrial and manufacturing jobs. I think there was a recognition recently that we should make sure that we put a focus there. I think we, as a legislature, even approved money toward studying how do we take resources here, especially in Escambia County, where we have real resources, natural gas pipelines, and that sort of thing coming here, port facilities. How do we leverage that, and bring industrial and manufacturing jobs here? So I'm glad that we've sort of woken up to that fact and are not ignoring what are sort of our bread and butter jobs that brought my family here to Pensacola. That's exactly what brought us here. And so I'm glad we're finally waking up to that fact and coming back to our bread and butter.
The legislature this year, Jeff, approved a work plan. I think one of the other delegation members mentioned it before, approved a transportation work plan that will bring $2 billion in infrastructure improvements to Northwest Florida over the next 5 years. And that includes ports, rails, it includes infrastructure to make sure that some of our industrial parks will be able to have water and sewer and wastewater and the utilities that they need. And the result of that is going to be the kinds of jobs that Representative Ingram just described. All jobs that we can get, we ought to try to get, but we ought to try to get good jobs where we can. Now, the other thing that we've done that I think relates to growth is that this year we doubled down on career technical education incentives for our school systems, providing incentives so that when a student in middle school or high school or college earns a national industry certification, and anything from IT to culinary arts to welding to anything else, that the school will get paid extra money because the student earned the certification, and the teacher can also get a bonus. We now have 273,000 Florida students earning national industry certifications in 268 different career fields. Those are passports to the real economy to get real jobs, and that's what's going to be the underpinning of the diversified growth that Representative Ingram described.
Okay, very good. And another question from a viewer kind of falls in the same category here. You may want to add a little bit to this. This viewer specifically wanted to key in how can we help raise the wages of low-income people, as we see the cost of living. So on the lower, how do we get the folks who are in lower income jobs up to the next level, I think is the question from the viewer.
Well, the answer is I don't think creating an artificial economic law and say, well, we're just going to raise their wages by government fiat. Now they're going to make more money. because that money has to come from someplace, and the someplace it comes from are from the very people who have to go into those stores or businesses to buy things. Instead, we need better jobs. Not just making sure the jobs that we have pay more, that's important, but making sure we have better jobs. That's why we need industrial parks, we need water and sewer, we need transportation infrastructure so that we will have the equipment to attract organizations, small and large businesses, to come here, to stay here, to grow here, and that creates the additional jobs. That's what we're seeing happening in Escambia County. This delegation worked together to make sure that we have $3 million set aside for infrastructure needs just in North Escambia County to make sure that we can attract new businesses that will provide better jobs. That's the best answer to how we can get more pay.
Very good.
Jeff, we have such a great opportunity with Airbus coming into Mobile that we can attract some of those subcontractors into Escambia, Santa Rosa, perhaps even Okaloosa County. And we can do that, as Senator Gates was saying and Representative Ingram, by having site readiness prepared for them to come. We have a ready workforce here, we have an excellent education system here, and we have a great environment just with our beaches and so forth. We're a real attraction to those companies, and I believe we're going to have them coming here.
Tell me about the tax credit scholarship program.
The tax credit scholarship program is a way for companies, corporations that owe taxes to the state to use some of their tax liability to provide scholarships for low-income students. About 2/3 of them are minority students around the state, and to be able to attend schools of their choice. It's a program that has been going on for a number of years in Florida. I sponsored legislation to expand the program, but now this year we did something really important, and that is we provided academic and financial accountability to the program, so that now students who are in private schools receiving tax credit scholarships, and again, these are low-income kids, mostly minority kids, they're going to be assessed with a state-approved assessment instrument to find out how they're doing, so that we'll know how well this program is really working. So parents will know how their children are progressing or regressing. Teachers will know, and the public will know, is it worth it to allow corporations to make these tax diversions in order to support the program? And the other thing we did was to bring the Auditor General in to make sure that all the money spent in this program is properly audited, accounted for, that none of it can be used, of course, for lobbying or political activity, and that all of it has to be used for scholarships for low-income students. It's a great program. I support it. I support it even more now that we have strong academic and financial accountability.
And I think our viewers can expect the legislature to take action to expand school choice on a variety of fronts. And one of those fronts is to enhance the corporate tax scholarship that goes to those low-income students that need school choice. But we all start from the position that education should not be a government-run monopoly. And parents will become more involved in the decisions being made at the school if they actually have a say in what school their children go to. So I'm excited about a frontier for Florida in the education space where parents will be more empowered to make decisions about where their children go to school, what programs are more attractive to them, and we can actually have an education system that is more like a free market system.
Okay. All right, here we go. Florida marketplace for health insurance. Question from a viewer, does the state of Florida plan to do anything differently in 2015 when it comes to Obamacare?
I doubt it, because we're not going to be a state that goes from 1 in every 6 Floridians being on Medicaid to a state that has 1 in every 4 Floridians on Medicaid. Representative Broxson, Representative Ingram, and I voted last year for a plan that would have created a web-based system where people can actually go and choose the type of health care that they need a la carte. Now, I'm of the view that if we had a healthcare system that was more focused on the individual and less focused on the employer, we'd have a far more vibrant system. Look at auto insurance in Florida. My goodness, the insurance companies are constantly competing for our business. But now, citizens really don't know how much healthcare costs because it's not paid by them. It's paid by an insurer that is lashed to their employer. So if we get, for example, Jeff, I probably don't need obstetrics care. So that wouldn't be a type of healthcare coverage that I would need. But there might be other types of care that I need and would want to select. So the more we empower the consumer, the less we empower the employer and, frankly, the government, I think the more of a robust free market system we'll have in healthcare. But the answer is not implementing Obamacare.
Yeah, because the criticism has been from many people out there that the Florida legislature and the governor will not expand Medicaid, which the federal government supposedly will pay for what is it, 10 years? Or I think guaranteeing for 3 years, and then it starts a declining, and the state has to pick it up for 10 years or something. So the argument is, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you take money from the federal government? So just to play devil's advocate here with you guys for a moment, why wouldn't you?
Well, Jeff, I sit on the Healthcare Appropriations Subcommittee, and just 10 years ago, Medicaid was only a fraction of the cost to the state budget of what it is now. Right now, the Medicaid cost alone is about 30% of the entire healthcare budget. And the healthcare budget itself is almost half of the entire state budget. We cannot continue on a path of expanding Medicaid where it becomes cost prohibitive to where we can't even sustain that anymore. So the answer is not to expand Medicaid. The answer, as Representative Gates said, is to allow a system where free markets can compete to bring those costs down. And that's the only thing that will work.
I don't mean to beat this issue up, but we got so much feedback on it last time that I just want to make sure that we try to address some of the concerns that we had from our viewers. The question was, well, maybe they understand what you're saying about that, but if the federal government's going to pay for it, why wouldn't the state of Florida take it?
Well, let me answer that. I was the superintendent of schools in Okaloosa County, and I can tell you that when the Congress passed the IDEA law, which is the law that says we need to provide extra benefits that the children who are disabled, have learning disabilities need, the Congress promised that the federal government would always pay 40%. On the best year, haven't paid 25%. And that those costs have been shifted onto local school districts and onto the states. And it's a great program, and I'm glad that the Congress passed it. But you can't, I mean, I know this is shocking to you, Jeff, but you can't always trust what you hear from Washington. Once in a while, they speak with forked tongue. And so what I did as President of the Senate, is I wrote the Secretary of Health and Human Services in Washington and said, well, let's talk. Let's negotiate. Would you be willing to work with us to develop a Florida plan? A plan where if somebody is morbidly obese, that if we agree to ask their friends and neighbors to pay for their health care costs, that they would agree to be part of a medically supervised weight loss program? What if they're smokers and as a result they're increasing their costs and those costs are being played off onto their neighbors? Could we ask as a condition of paying their health care costs that they be on a smoking cessation program? What if they're a drug abuser or an alcoholic? Could we at least get them into a treatment program that we would pay in return for giving them Medicaid? And the answer was, well, of course not. You can't expect any personal responsibility. And we got no willingness to cooperate or be flexible out of the federal government for making sure that if people needed a limited kind of health care coverage, they could get it. Matt Gaetz doesn't need obstetrics care, and neither does his mother, who just celebrated her 63rd birthday. We don't need to make sure that everybody is treated with the same one-size-fits-all approach, which is what Obamacare does. Instead, we even asked, could we negotiate a flexible Florida plan? And the answer we got from the federal government, even when we had Democrats like Bob Graham trying to help us set up meetings, the answer was no answer at all.
Okay.
Jeff, one of the things that we know is the history of Medicaid. When it was implemented in 1971, Florida was the last of two states to trust the government that they would do what they said they would do. It started out at 2%. Immediately they had a special session to deal with adding a tax. We know, and the government tried to induce us to buy in early, that at the end of the day, whether it's 10 years or 15 years, we're going to have to pick up the bill. And we could not in good faith do that to our citizens, saying that now we're spending 30% of our budget, we may be spending 50. What does that do to education and roads? And do you want a massive tax increase? And we thought their answer was yes, and I'm proud that this delegation chose to hold the line on that issue, and it's been a good decision.
Okay. Let me move on. I'm getting short on time, so I want to hit a couple of more viewer questions here. How much of the state certification funding will filter down to the Okaloosa School District's Choice program?
We hope in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it depends upon how many students will actually be able to earn industry certifications. The money isn't paid based on the number of kids who take the class, but the number who actually complete and earn certifications. And for every student who does, The payment it ranges between $500 and $1,000. It depends on the number of students, not just for Okaloosa, but for Escambia and Santa Rosa and all of the other counties in the WSRE viewing area.
Okay, let me jump on to another subject here. Again, a question from a viewer. He or she says, I just want to say that I think it's extremely important that we make all citizens show a form of valid state ID when they vote in county, state, and federal elections. I would also like to see a way to validate absentee votes. What would stop someone from stealing absentee ballots and voting as those persons? One way to prevent it. I got 3 minutes, so give me a real quick answer.
Yeah, I attended a conference, the National Congress of State Legislators, I think is the acronym, and there was a forum on whether or not this was constitutional and right to require people to show ID. Between when I entered the conference hall and the room where the lecture was going to take place, I had to show my ID 3 times, and they were advocating not requiring ID having to be shown during elections. Thought that was ironic and showed how silly the whole thing is. Of course, you should have to identify yourself when you vote. So,
Representative Broxson, real quick, and this is kind of a very tight question in Santa Rosa County there. Do you support placing Mr. Williamson's son in the seat vacated on the Santa Rosa County Commission?
Well, our delegation signed a letter to the governor certifying that. So, although we know the governor's sovereign, he has not made an appointment, but that's because he is very deliberate in all of his appointments.
Okay.
And he will make that final decision.
Okay, that's a question from a viewer. I have 2 minutes. If each one of you could give me just a few seconds of what you're looking forward to as we move forward here. I'll start with you.
One of the things that I'm very concerned about, we just passed the Florida GI Bill that certifies that we are committed to our veterans and military personnel. Now we see the National Veterans Program that really is imploded.
Okay.
And we have to do more, and hopefully this next session, we're going to send a message that we want to be more of a participant in making sure that our facilities are taking care of our veterans, and I think you'll see that our leadership will do that.
I'm real tight on time.
Jeff, this past legislative session passed the least number of bills in a number of years, 1,600, I believe, when normally it's been 2,500 up to 3,000 or more. So I'm so glad that we passed a limited, smaller number of bills. What I would like to see as we move forward is to try and get rid of as many rules and regulations that are unnecessary, hampering our free market capital.
Jeff, Florida is now the toughest state in America on violent sexual predators. I'm glad to have been able to introduce that law. We're the only state in America where now if you rape a child under the age of 12, a senior citizen, or someone who is disabled, you will spend 50 years in a state prison. No time off for good behavior, and I think that's the right policy for Florida.
I'm really tight on time.
Jeff, we just came through a flood. There were a lot of stories of heroism, people saving each other, neighbors, and loved ones. I just want to say I'm proud to be a part of this community, this resilient community. Thank you for everyone who
On behalf of the delegation, thanks for WSRE giving us the time. Thank you, Jeff. And anybody who's watching who has concerns or questions they didn't get answered tonight, contact any of us. We're delighted to talk with you.
So very nice of you guys to take some time to join us, and thank you so very much to all of our viewers who are watching and calling in this evening. And we want to acknowledge our guests from the Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation, Senate President Don Gates, Representatives Clay Ingram, Mike Hill, Doug Broxson, and Matt Gates. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching Legislative Review 2014, Dialogue with the Delegation. Have yourself a wonderful and safe evening. Take great care of yourself. We'll see you soon.